If you're over 70, there are patterns I've noticed. Things people wish they'd paid attention to earlier, not because they couldn't have done something about them, but because no one ever explained how much these small choices would matter later. I've spent decades watching how people age, and I've seen the same regrets come up again and again. The interesting thing is, most of these regrets aren't about the big dramatic moments in life. They're about the quiet, everyday decisions that seem small at the time, but added up to something much larger. What I want to share with you today are the things I've heard people wish they'd understood sooner. Not to make you feel bad about the past, but because understanding these patterns might help you make different choices going forward. My name is Harold Bennett, and I've worked with older adults for most of my life. I'm not a doctor or a medical professional. I'm someone who has listened carefully to hundreds of conversations, who has watched people age in different ways, and who has learned to recognize the patterns that separate those who maintain their independence and joy from those who struggle more than they need to. Today, I want to have an honest conversation with you about what I've learned. If you find this helpful, I'd appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing to this channel. I try to share these observations in a way that's honest, but also hopeful, because I truly believe it's never too late to make changes that matter. Let me start with something I've heard more times than I can count. People in their 70s and 80s often tell me they wish they'd stayed more connected to friends and community. Not in a surface way, but in a real, consistent way. I've seen this play out in countless lives, and the pattern is always the same. Two people, same age, similar health, similar circumstances. One of them, let's call her Margaret, made it a point to see friends regularly, joined a book club, volunteered at the library once a week. The other, Susan, gradually let those connections fade. She told herself she'd reconnect when she had more time, or when she felt more energetic, or when things settled down. But that time never really came. What I've noticed is that Margaret, even when her health started declining, had people checking on her. She had reasons to get dressed in the morning. She had conversations to look forward to. Susan, on the other hand, found herself isolated. And isolation does something to a person. It makes small problems feel enormous. It makes every ache feel more significant. It steals motivation in a way that's hard to describe. The reason this matters so much is that human beings are built for connection. We're not meant to go through life alone, especially in our later years. When you have people in your life, real people you see regularly, not just names on a phone, your mind stays sharper. You have more reasons to take care of yourself. You notice changes in your health earlier because someone else notices them too. I've seen people decline rapidly once they become isolated, and I've seen others thrive well into their 80s and 90s because they maintain their connections. If you're reading this and you've let some friendships fade, I want you to know it's not too late. Reach out to one person this week. Just one. Send a note, make a phone call, suggest coffee. It doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be genuine. The second thing I've seen people regret is not taking their physical strength seriously earlier. I'm not talking about running marathons or lifting heavy weights. I'm talking about basic strength, the ability to get up from a chair without using your arms, the ability to carry your groceries, the ability to get down on the floor and back up again. Two men I knew, Joe and Frank, both turned 70 the same year. Joe had always been somewhat active. He took walks. He did simple exercises at home, nothing extreme. Frank had been sedentary for years. He'd tell you he was too tired, too busy, that exercise wasn't really his thing. By the time they were both 75, the difference was striking. Joe could still do things for himself. He could change a light bulb, carry in groceries, get down to play with his grandchildren. Frank struggled with basic tasks. He'd fallen twice in 6 months. He needed help with things he used to do without thinking. What happens is this. After age 30, we naturally start losing muscle mass. It's called sarcopenia, and it happens to everyone. But it happens much faster if you're not using your muscles regularly. By the time you're 70, if you haven't been doing anything to maintain your strength, you've lost a significant amount of muscle. And that muscle isn't just about looking fit. It's about stability. It's about not falling. It's about maintaining your independence. The bones get more fragile with age, yes, but strong muscles protect those bones. Strong muscles keep you balanced. Strong muscles mean you can recover if you start to stumble. I've seen people whose entire life trajectory changed after a fall. One fall leads to hospitalization, which leads to weakness from bed rest, which leads to another fall. It's a cycle that's hard to break once it starts. But here's what I want you to understand. You can rebuild strength even now. It's not too late. Simple things matter. Standing up from a chair without using your hands, even just 5 times a day, lifting light weights, or even cans of soup, taking walks. These aren't dramatic changes, but they're protective changes. I hope this is making sense so far. These aren't things people talk about much, but they matter more than most people realize. The third regret I hear often is about teeth. I know that might sound strange, but hear me out. I've watched people lose teeth in their 70s and 80s, not because it was inevitable, but because they didn't take dental health seriously in their 50s and 60s. A woman I knew, Carol, had always been meticulous about dental care. Regular cleanings, dealt with problems early, took care of her gums. Her friend Nancy figured she'd deal with dental issues when they became serious. By the time they were both 72, Carol still had most of her teeth. Nancy had lost several and was struggling with dentures. What Nancy didn't realize was how much this would affect her life. She couldn't eat certain foods anymore. She felt self-conscious smiling. Her nutrition suffered because she avoided foods that were hard to chew, which happened to be many of the healthiest foods. And the cost of dealing with serious dental problems was far more than regular preventive care would have been. Your mouth is connected to the rest of your health in ways most people don't appreciate. Gum disease is linked to heart disease, to diabetes complications, to inflammation throughout your body. When you lose teeth, your jawbone starts to deteriorate. Your face changes shape. But beyond the physical, there's dignity involved. Being able to eat what you want, to smile without worry, to speak clearly, these things matter to quality of life. If you've been putting off dental care, I'm asking you to reconsider. Get a cleaning scheduled. Deal with that tooth that's been bothering you. Your future self will thank you. Another pattern I've seen is people regretting not learning to manage stress better. I've known 2 men, Robert and Walter, both successful in their careers. Both dealt with significant pressure throughout their working years. Robert learned early on that he needed ways to calm his mind. He took walks. He had hobbies. He made time for things that brought him peace. Walter pushed through everything. He wore stress like a badge of honor, never took time to decompress, always moved on to the next task. By their early 70s, Robert's blood pressure was reasonable, his sleep was decent, he seemed at ease in his own skin. Walter had chronic health issues, trouble sleeping, a quick temper, and a body that seemed to be in constant fight or flight mode. What research tells us is that chronic stress damages the body in measurable ways. It raises inflammation, it affects your heart, it weakens your immune system, it even changes your brain. People who never learn to manage stress carry that damage into their later years. Their bodies are more worn down. They're more susceptible to illness. They have less resilience when problems arise. But what I've also seen is that it's possible to learn stress management even later in life. Deep breathing works. Taking time in nature works. Having hobbies that absorb your attention works. Prayer or meditation works for many people. The specific method matters less than the consistent practice of giving your nervous system time to settle. If you've lived your whole life in high gear, I want you to know that you can shift down now. Your body will respond. It's not too late to give yourself this gift. The fifth thing I hear people wish they'd done differently is taking their hearing seriously. I've watched this pattern unfold so many times. Someone starts having trouble hearing in their 60s. They miss parts of conversations. They ask people to repeat themselves. But they don't do anything about it because hearing aids seem like an admission of getting old, or they're too expensive, or they'll deal with it later. By their 70s, they've withdrawn from social situations because it's too exhausting to try to keep up with conversations. A man I knew, call him George, resisted getting hearing aids for years. His wife Eleanor got hers as soon as she needed them. George gradually stopped going to family gatherings, stopped attending church, stopped meeting friends for coffee. He'd say he was tired, but really, he was avoiding the frustration of not being able to hear. Eleanor stayed engaged, stayed social, stayed mentally sharp. George became isolated and, honestly, depressed. What happens when you can't hear well is that your brain has to work much harder to process sound. That constant strain is exhausting. It also means you're getting less cognitive stimulation because you're not fully participating in conversations and activities. Studies have shown that untreated hearing loss is linked to faster cognitive decline. It's also linked to depression and isolation, which we've already talked about. But here's the thing. Hearing aids have improved dramatically. They're smaller, more effective, and there are more affordable options than there used to be. If you're struggling to hear, Please don't wait. Get your hearing checked. Explore your options. Staying connected to the world around you is worth it. Your relationships are worth it. Your mental health is worth it. If you're finding this helpful, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you noticed any of these patterns in your own life? Another regret I encounter is about not staying curious and learning new things. I've seen people who retired and essentially stopped engaging their minds in new ways. They watched television. They followed the same routines, but they didn't challenge themselves to learn anything new. Compare that to people who took up new hobbies, learned new skills, read books on unfamiliar topics, took classes at the community center. The difference in how these two groups aged was remarkable. The ones who kept learning stayed sharper, seemed more alive, had more to talk about, had more reasons to get up in the morning. The ones who settled into pure routine seemed to fade faster, both mentally and physically. Your brain is like a muscle in this way. It needs exercise. When you stop challenging it, it loses capacity. When you learn something new, you're building new neural pathways. You're keeping your mind flexible and resilient. It doesn't have to be anything grand. Learning to use a smartphone or computer, taking up painting, learning about birds, reading history, trying new recipes, learning a card game. These all count. What matters is that you're engaging with something unfamiliar, something that makes you think. I've watched people in their 70s and 80s learn remarkable things when they gave themselves permission to be beginners again. If you've fallen into a rut of routine, I want to encourage you to pick one new thing to explore. Just one. See where it takes you. Your mind is still capable of growth. Don't waste that capacity. The last thing I want to talk about is something more subtle, but I've heard it expressed in different ways many times. People wish they'd been kinder to themselves earlier. They wish they'd worried less about what other people thought. They wish they'd done more of what brought them joy and less of what they thought they were supposed to do. A woman once told me, "Harold, I spent so much of my life trying to be what everyone else needed that I forgot to figure out what I actually wanted." She was 76 when she said this, and I could see the sadness in her eyes. Not bitterness exactly, but a kind of wistful regret for time she felt she'd wasted on worry and people-pleasing. What I've learned from listening to people is that aging has a way of clarifying what actually matters. The opinions of people you barely know stop matching. The pressure to meet certain standards fades. What remains is the question of whether you're living in a way that feels true to who you are. And for many people, the answer is that they spent decades not really asking themselves that question. They did what was expected. They followed the script. And now, in their 70s or 80s, they're finally giving themselves permission to be themselves. But they're also aware of how much time passed before they got there. If you're reading this, I want to tell you something important. You still have time. However many years you have left, you can spend them being more authentically yourself. You can let go of worries that don't serve you. You can prioritize what brings you joy. You can be gentler with yourself about your limitations and more appreciative of your strengths. This isn't selfish. This is wisdom. Let me bring this together. What I've seen people regret after 70 comes down to this. They wish they'd stayed connected to people. They wish they'd taken better care of their physical strength. They wish they'd protected their teeth and their hearing. They wish they'd learned to manage stress. They wish they'd kept their minds engaged and curious. And they wish they'd been kinder to themselves all along. None of these are things you can't address now. Every single one of them is something you can still influence, starting today. I'm not suggesting you can turn back time or undo every consequence of past choices. That's not realistic, and it's not helpful to think that way. What I am saying is that the choices you make now still matter. The connections you nurture now, the strength you build now, the care you give yourself now, these things will shape how you experience the next 5, 10, 20 years. You're not powerless. You're not past the point where change matters. You're at a point where you have clarity about what's important, and that clarity is valuable. If there's one thing I want you to take from this conversation, it's this. Start small, but start. Pick one thing from what we've talked about and do something about it this week. Reach out to an old friend. Schedule a dental appointment. Start doing simple strength exercises at home. Get your hearing checked. Pick up a book on a topic you've always been curious about. Give yourself permission to let go of one worry that's been weighing on you. Just one thing. Because one thing leads to another, and small changes compound over time in the same way that small neglects compound over time. You're not alone in this. Everyone who reaches this stage of life has regrets. Everyone wishes they'd done some things differently. But regret doesn't have to be the final word. You still have agency. You still have the ability to make choices that will serve you well. And you still have time to experience more joy, more connection, more peace than you might think possible right now. I've seen it happen. I've seen people make changes in their 70s and 80s that genuinely improve their quality of life. It's not too late for you. If this conversation helped you, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing to this channel. I try to share observations like these regularly, always with the goal of being honest, but also hopeful. And if you know someone else who might benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. Sometimes we all need a gentle reminder that we still have choices, that we still matter, that it's still worth taking care of ourselves. Thank you for listening. I wish you well.